Danger is all around you at the poker table. The trick to becoming a successful poker player is learning how to avoid the dangerous traps, while at the same time invoking fear into your opponent's hearts by playing some tricky hands. Let's talk about dangerous hands to play. The worst type of hand you can be dealt when playing Hold'em is a hand that seems too good to fold but isn't good enough to raise with. It's easy to know that you should raise with aces and fold deuce-7 offsuit, but hands like king-jack offsuit can often cause you real problems. While high cards are better than low cards in most situations, when playing no limit Hold'em, sometimes the little cards often have a better risk-reward ratio. You see, the real problem with trouble hands like king-jack, ace-jack, queen-jack, or even king-queen is that when you do flop a pair with them, you'll often have kicker trouble. Too often when you call a raise with a hand like king-queen, you'll be up against ace-king or maybe even pocket aces or pocket kings. If you were in there with king-queen and the flop came queen-6 deuce, you'd have what appears to be a really strong hand. The problem you need to consider, though, is that if someone decides to play with you after that flop, what hands could they have that you can actually beat? The bottom line is that if you were to play a big pot on that flop for all your money, chances are that you'd be walking into a set of deuces, sixes, queens, maybe an ace-queen, a pair of kings, or pocket aces. Generally speaking, these trouble hands often win small pots when no one else hits the flop and lose monster pots when they run into a better hand. Why? Because it's really difficult to fold a seemingly strong hand after a flop like that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not recommending that you never play a hand like king, queen, or ace-jack, but always remember that when you do decide to play one of these hands, you need to proceed cautiously. Don't get married to top pair if your opponent is pushing the betting hard. Let's talk about dangerous hands that you should own. Now, compare that to playing a hand like pocket fours. This hand is much easier to play. You either hit the flop by hitting three of a kind, or you have a hand with very little value. Let's look at another example. Let's say you call a raise with pocket fours from late position from a player whom you suspect has a strong hand, maybe even pocket aces. You aren't calling because you think your little pair is the best hand necessarily, but you are calling because of the potential to win a really big pot. Let's say that flop now comes jack 4 deuce rainbow, or in other words, gin, baby. Now, if your opponent did in fact start with a hand like aces, kings, or queens, chances are you'll be able to win his whole stack if you bet it right. Had the flop come something like jack 9-8, well, then you can safely fold your pair of fours without risking another chip. So as you can see, it's a small risk in relation to the big payday a small pair might offer you. There is one last group of hands that you might want to add to your repertoire, and those are small suited connectors like 6-7 suited. These hands can be a little more tricky to play than the small pairs, but you'll be able to connect with them more often. The same principle holds true with these little cards as with the little pairs. Let's look at one final example. You call a raise with 6-7 of hearts, and the flop comes 6-6 deuce. If your opponent has a big overpair, you might be able to win all of his chips because he may not believe that you'd call a raise with a 6 in your hand. The key difference between the dangerous hands to own and the dangerous hands to play against is that it's easy to get away from the dangerous hands to own, but it's often very difficult to avoid traps with the dangerous hands to play.